Welcome to Barnstable Today. I'm Nick Cortez. From Provincetown to Bourne, the history of Cape Cod can be found just about everywhere you look. It's in the old captains' houses, it's on the trails that run deep into the woods, it's along our coastline and in our busy harbors. But perhaps the richest collection of Cape Cod's history from the mid-1800s to the present can be found in an unlikely place, a small basement room located in the former county jail in Barnstable Village. That's where historian Lou Cataldo and co-archivist Tess Korkich are working to digitize Cataldo's huge collection of pictures, video, and audio recordings that he's amassed in more than 6 decades of seeking out first-hand accounts of what life on Cape Cod was really like over the past 150 years. Preserving his archives is one part of what the 90-year-old Cataldo calls his final project. The other is to fund the construction of a building that would house important documents and artifacts from Barnstable County, including his own. Recently, Channel 18's Melissa Chartrand paid a visit to the old jail to talk to Cataldo about his career in law enforcement and his passion for Cape Cod's history. It's a life story that would take up a few pages of the book on Cape Cod's history all by itself.
Tell us what you're doing here, why we're here today.
Well, strangely enough, these were my stomping grounds. I worked here for 25 and a half years under Sheriff Tulloch. I was Chief Deputy Sheriff, ran the Criminal Bureau and the Barnstable County Training Academy. And this was the jail where we had a small headquarters to the rear of this building. And later on we moved over, now they call it the Barnstable County Service Center, Police Service Center. And they're housed there at that time the radio facilities and the BCI, which is the county's Bureau of Criminal Investigation, which I was director for a good number of years. And so this is my home ground. Little did I think years ago that I'd be back here.
That's right. And now you were telling me, so Tess, why don't you tell us a little bit about this project that you're undertaking that Lou says you're making quite progress on?
Well, we started about 4 months ago, and Lou started bringing over his file cabinets with certain items that I didn't even know he owned. For instance, over there are some tapes from the 1950s. When he started Tales of Cape Cod in 1949, he started interviewing people on tapes, and they were then in their 90s. So now we have tapes of people who were in their 90s talking about their life as children in the 1880s and their parents' life and their grandparents' life. So he's brought them to me, and I have fortunately been able to obtain a tape recorder that will digitalize the tapes. So we're taking those those interviews from the 50s. We have photographs that he's taken in his illustrious career from 50s, 40s, 50s, right straight through as a law enforcement officer. So we purchased a scanner that'll take his old negatives and make them into pictures for posterity. This scanner will also take slides and film strips and make them into 8x10 photos. So we're doing those. And then you see behind us we have many cabinets of his activities. Law enforcement is the biggest one. Then we have Tales of Cape Cod. We have the Tercentenary, where he was the director for the Barnstable County. We have the Bicentennial. We have many of his projects that he's done over the past 50 or so years for Barnstable County.
I would say that we're probably 60% of the archives that are here now, and I don't believe we'll have room for the balance. So that's why we're striving for, with the permission of the county commissioners, we're now striving to get an outside building. Will be on the ground floor where people, paraplegics and whatever, handicapped people, that is to say, would have access to it, and historians, whoever would like to come in and go over the material. So that's my last objective.
There you go. And now you said, as you say, not all of your materials are even here. We don't even have all of them.
About 60%, and then I got about 400 or 500 books as well.
Oh my goodness.
Yes, historical books, reference books. So we've got a library, and there's no room here.
And now the oral history as well, the Tales of Cape Cod that you started so ahead of your time, 50 years ago, you began, now technology has changed but it's so important to preserve that history. Does that continue? Do you continue with that today?
We do. The main thing that I keep telling Tess, because not to boast really, but there are two things I feel were sort of highlights of my career. That was one of them, and that is pioneering oral history. This, I checked with the Library of Congress and found that the only other recordings were being done were provincialisms of speech in different parts of the country. And so they were amazed when I told them what I was doing here, and we were the forerunner of oral history. That is to say, in those days, back in 1940, just shortly thereabouts, or just before that, the heavy tape recorders, and that's what I had. I think we have one in the corner there. Were the only means of doing the recording. And then, of course, later on we have these cassettes, and those are handy things to have. But I had to lug that everything all the way over around the Cape, Chatham, where I did Captain Aldrich and a few others. So I think that's a distinct honor of having pioneered oral history for the
Absolutely.
Not only for Barnstable County, but for the country, I guess.
Absolutely. And tell us some of your other accomplishments that you're most proud of.
Well,
there are so many.
Well, there's only really two that I really cherish, and that was one. The other one is in law enforcement, where I was involved for some 30 years in law enforcement, and that was my Bureau of Criminal Investigation at that time under the Sheriff's Department. I came up with the idea of searching the files. It was a very hard process of finding who you want as the culprit when you found a latent fingerprint. So I worked on that theory of scanning of prints, because at that time, once again, technology was just rearing its head on that phase, and I checked with the Baird Atomic in Boston, I think it's Cambridge, and I checked with one of the technicians there, and he said, yes, he says, that's possible. So I said, let's go for it, and we presented it before the International Association for Identification. I think it was in Grand Rapids, Michigan, I believe that's, or Rochester, New York, probably Rochester. I've been to different IAI conferences, and there happened to be one of the members of the group was an FBI agent. He heard that, ran to Hoover with it, and the next thing you know, this finally came into being.
Indeed, to be so proud. You've preserved buildings, you've moved buildings. We moved the former jail, the Treasure Museum, the Coast Guard Heritage Museum.
The old Colonial Courthouse we acquired.
Right.
Yeah.
What keeps you have such an interest in these historic interests? What's led you to stick with it for so long?
Well, if it wasn't for my good wife Laura, I don't know if I could have done these things. She allowed me to pursue what I wanted to, and I think the thing that I'm surprised at was that I was working more than 40, 60, 70, 80 hours a week at the Bureau of Criminal Investigation, and what spare time I had, I should have been spending with my children, and I'd go out and record some of these old timers. So it was kind of squeezing every hour of the day to do what you pursue to do. I'd like to have gone fishing, but this came first.
Thanks to Lou and Tess for making some time for us, and of course thanks to Melissa Chartrand and videographer Sarah Beal for their work on this story. That's all we have for now. I'm Nick Cortez, and we'll see you next time on Barnstable Today.